I would like to begin my communication in the sermon without using words. Now, don't get worried, I'm not going to try speaking in tongues or do any signs or wonders. These will be letters of the English alphabet, and I'll just begin. USA, CIA, FBI, NASA, DHS, FAA, FCC, OSHA, NAFTA, UK, USSR, AWOL, DMV, NFL, NFC, AFC, MLB, NBA, CDC, OTC, AMA, MD, PA, UFO, SUV, ETA, LOL, and GIF. Now that list could be longer, much longer, but all of you recognize those as acronyms, and most of those you probably relate to the agency, the league, the country that we're trying to communicate with just those letters. And we have a world full of acronyms. And those acronyms, of course, are the abbreviations formed from the initial letters of other words and often pronounced as a word. And occasionally that word is very meaningful to the cause of the acronym. So if I were to say a few other acronyms, you would probably recognize them as branches of the Church of God. I'm not going to do that, but that's how we identify some of our brethren, by just the acronyms. And I mentioned a couple of nations represented here today, the United States of America, of course, and the United Kingdom, which our brother Reg Killingley is perhaps a dual citizen of Texas and the United Kingdom. He lives in East Texas, so he's a citizen. So. Now, we probably aren't as familiar with SPQR, and that stands for Senatus Populus Romanus. And I can pronounce SPQR much better than I did that. But that is an antonym representing the official name of the Roman Empire. And you historians may know that. And even in the Hebrew, I'm told that Torah is an acronym for the first 5 books of the Bible. And so the use of acronyms is by no means something new. However, they exploded in the 20th century with the increase in communication and an increase of knowledge. And now with our smart gadgets, we expect here in the 21st century for them to even exponentially evolve and explode again. Well, today I would like to concentrate on 4 acronyms. They are MAD, MAS, SAD, and SAS. And my subject is peace. And I've titled the sermon, Acronyms for Peace. Most of us Cold War survivors are familiar with the first 2 of these. If you were born in, say, the last 30 years, you perhaps haven't concentrated on those so much. They don't seem to be as prevalent or as pressing, although the danger is still very real that created these concepts. So before I start with the first one, MAD, let me make a statement. And not all philosophies will agree with this statement. The statement is, peace is a result of strength. And as we go on, I hope to reiterate and clarify and reinforce that statement. I'd like to read from an article. It's from a publication called Farnham Street. And I'd like to break in. The title of it is The History of Mutually Assured Destruction, the MAD, or MAD acronym. An acronym for peace, yes. With that kind of name, it's still an acronym for peace. The concept of mutually assured destruction was first described by Wilkie Collins, a 19th century English author, in a letter written at the time of the Franco-Prussian War, over 70 years before the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. He states, "I am, like the rest of my countrymen, heartily on the German side in the war. But what is to be said of the progress of humanity? Here are the nations still ready to slaughter each other at the command of one miserable wretch whose interest is to set them to fighting. Is this the 19th century or the 9th? Are we before the time of Christ or after? I begin to believe in only one civilizing influence, the discovery of one of these days of a destructive agent so terrible that war shall mean annihilation and men's fears shall force them to keep the peace." Men's fear forces them to keep the peace. Mutually assured destructions. It seems that Collins was very much ahead of his time. Alfred Nobel, the founder of the Nobel Prize and the inventor of dynamite, recognized this too, saying, "The day when two Army Corps can annihilate each other in 1 second, all civilized nations, it is to be hoped, will recoil from war and discharge their troops." It continues further down, "The concept is somewhat fragile and requires constant vigilance and innovation to maintain. There is also the ever-prevalent risk of accidental or terrorist detonation." And here we see, and through the Cold War we saw, two opposing strengths, power on both sides. And that would support my statement, peace is a result of strength. And that might be true with MAD, mutually assured destruction, but I don't think too many of us take a lot of comfort in that being our only hope for peace. The next acronym, MAS, is perhaps somewhat a little better, mutually assured survival. You know, we often say and look around and say, if all of the innovation of man, the creativity, the blessings God has given him of his mind and the ability to make things, if that could all be focused on the good, what a wonderful world and society we would have. And, you know, if all the hackers out there who are disrupting the internet, if they were working on the side of good so that all of ours would run faster, better, and help us produce more for mankind, wouldn't that be great? Well, in 1983, we had a president of the United States who wanted to contribute just to that. And I found an article, it's back in the archives. Actually, this article is dated April 5th, 1983, and it's referring to a speech by President Reagan. The name of the article is Mutually Assured Survival Becomes National Strategy, and it's by a man named Graham Lowry. It says, President Reagan's historic address on March 23rd to the American people, committing the United States to the development of a defensive beam weapons system to free the world from the threat of nuclear war, has set the stage for a decisive political fight over whether the nation and the Western economies survive. The scientific mobilization the President has called to perfect directed energy technologies is an effort, he rightly says, holds the promise of changing human history. In a single speech, the President has laid the foundation for ending the era of thermonuclear terror by rejecting the lunatic strategy of deterrence known as mutually assured destruction. The President called upon the scientific community who gave us nuclear weapons to turn their great talents to the cause of mankind and world peace, to give us the means of rendering those nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. And we do have to admit, President Reagan had an effect upon the world, and with that concept and somewhat the development of, say, the defensive systems today, we witness the capitalist economy of the United States pretty well outrunning the socialist, communist economy of the USSR, and therefore it's dismantling eventually. And when I said it seems to be a better alternative to MAD, we realize it is still of men. Therefore, it too is very fragile. So if one or more nations holds the cards to this mutually assured survival, it's still dependent upon the will, the desire, and the morals of the men who hold the power over those systems. But once again, peace is the result of strength. Here we just had a shift in the arms race. I still don't think too many of us are comforted by the peace we have from mutually assured survival. I'll be turning to Isaiah, the 14th chapter, and here we see what I'm going to say is the beginning of a reference to the beginning of our third acronym, SAD. Of course, that spells sad, and it is. SAD, spiritually assured destruction. Lucifer, a beautiful covering cherub whom God gave free will, as he does us, knowingly, willingly rebelled and rejected God as the Most High and had every intention of he himself becoming the Most High. I'll read starting in Isaiah 14, verse 12. How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How are you cast down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? For you have said to your heart, I will ascend into the heavens. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and I will be like the Most High. And most translations say that he is saying, I will be the Most High. So here is direct defiance to the almighty power of the universe. And the result for Satan is sad, spiritually assured destruction. And Satan knows his fate, and that is why he longs and desires to share that fate with God's most precious creation. He would love to share that with God's potential sons and daughters. Satan is the deceiver and the great counterfeit artist. From his first lie to Eve in the Garden of Eden, you surely won't die, to his achieving, deceiving doctrine that religions teach, where man will have to share his fate of an everlasting, torturous punishment. Those are the counterfeits and the deceits that Satan uses because he owns sad. He owns spiritually assured destruction. But he doesn't give up on us and give up on it, whether it's by sweet talk or fear. His goal and his desire for the children of God is also sad, spiritually assured destruction. But as Jesus says, and we'll be reading this in less than 2 weeks in John 14, let not your heart be troubled. Because we have that fourth acronym for peace. And that is SAS, spiritually assured survival. An acronym we use a lot of times is AKA, spiritually assured survival, AKA also known as salvation, as eternal life. Spiritually assured survival is the guarantee that comes with God's plan for his children. As we near the Passover, let's consider and give thanks and praise to God as our loving, gracious, and merciful Father who gave us his Son as a sacrifice so that we may have spiritually assured survival. And that is a gift from him. His plan before man was created provided for the slaying of the Passover lamb. I won't turn there, but in Revelation 13:8, the chapter on the beast, he mentions the lamb was slain before the foundations of the earth. And then Ephesians 2:20, the Apostle Paul reiterates this early point of God instituting this plan. And are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom all things are building fitly framed together, grows into a holy temple to the Lord, in whom you are also builded together as a habitation of God through the Spirit. We are God's temple, his building, his creation, his children. In Hebrews, the 9th chapter, Hebrews 9, verse 6, we read, "Now, when these things were thus ordained, the priests were always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of God." And I apparently have the wrong scripture. 9:26, excuse me. "For then must he often have suffered since the foundation of the world, but now once in the end of the world he has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself." These upcoming holy days, the Passover and the days of unleavened bread, we have these words to consider. We have been given a glimpse of God's plan. And yes, peace is a result of strength. And we should draw strength from God, and we should have peace with God and draw on the peace of God. This season is way less about how good we are and way more about God's love for us. If the old concept that we can prepare enough to be worthy and qualified to take the Passover is stealing our peace, I pray for God to lift that burden from those who think that way, because that is exactly what he has done with the Passover. And God chooses to whom he will show mercy. You know, sometimes in our self-judgmental ways, we ask, well, why did you call me, God? Why me? And we hear the song. And then sometimes in ourselves, our judgmental nature of men, we might say, now, why did God choose him or her? Why? Well, that's because our view is so much more narrower than God's. Very narrow. His ways are much higher and bigger. So we shouldn't even question those once we grow mature. We may not like certain behaviors and things, but why God calls and chooses someone is a little beyond our scope. But God chooses all kinds, doesn't he? If you notice, he chooses those. I mean, he even chooses those who drive Ford trucks. And, of course, I hesitated to open up that can of worms because I may find myself like Job. The thing that I fear the most has come upon me, and someday my Dodge will break down old Highway 80, and Ron Avey will have to pull me home with his Ford. So I'm shouldn't have brought that up probably, but if that happens, Lord have mercy on me. And I would be remiss if I did not, since we're talking about acronyms, the old one that is Ford, found on road dead. So anyway, so I digress, but back to God's plan. Peace is a result of strength. I'll turn now to 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter. And while this sermon is about peace, it is really about the source of peace. And in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 1, the Apostle Paul says, "Moreover, brethren, I would not that you should be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did drink all the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spirit, that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ." The plan began before the foundations of the world, and the God of the Old Testament is the rock who became Jesus Christ. And if we talk about peace in the Old Testament, where did the servants of God find peace? They found it from the rock. When was the nation of Israel that God chose to reveal himself to the world through the strongest and at peace? It was when the rock, the Christ, provided it. And then a Messiah was prophesied, and the rock was born of the Virgin Mary. Emmanuel, God with us. We read the account of Jesus' birth in the early chapters of Matthew and Luke. And as we go through the plan, we see Jesus as God and man grew up as a young boy and a young man in Judea and in the Galilee. And that took some strength. Yes, he had God with him, but he was also human, and it took strength. And we find out we get our strength and our peace also from the rock, from Christ. And there are two kinds of peace. With the Passover, with the spiritually assured survival, we have peace with God. When we say yes and receive his Spirit, we have peace with God. But there are times, with all that has been given to us and the understanding we have, that are very tough, people going through severe situations. That's when we need the peace of God. Yes, we have peace with God, but we need that peace that surpasses understanding. And from anxiety to facing imminent situations, even life-threatening, we call upon the peace of God. And both of these we obtain from the strength of Jesus Christ. His strength when he was here on earth, growing up as a boy, and we're grateful especially for that strength he had that last week that he walked upon the earth, the Passover week. Some of the highlights there during that week, and I have scriptures, but I'll probably just mention them. In John 12, verse 1 through 8, we have the anointing of Jesus when Mary anointed him with the precious ointment. And then in John 12 through 19, he enters Jerusalem on a colt, and they're singing Hosanna and praising him, and it's a celebration. But then in Luke 19, and I'll turn to Luke 19, we see what is probably not as such a peaceful setting as earlier that day. Luke 19, verses 41. And when he was come near, he beheld the city, and he wept over it, saying, "If you had known, even you, at least in this day, the things which belong unto your peace, but now they are hid from your eyes. For the day shall come upon you, and your enemies shall cast a trench about you, and compass you round, and keep you on every side, and shall lay you even with the ground, and with the children within you, and they shall not leave in you one stone upon the other, because you knew not the time of your visitation." So Jesus here weeping for Jerusalem. And throughout this week, Jesus reveals and teaches many things to the disciples. Many parables. He cleanses the temple. And then in Luke 22, begins the Passover preparation, where he tells the disciples to find the man carrying a pitcher of water and to go to the upper room. And then in John the 13th chapter, we will be covering these. If not before, at least during Passover, we have the account of the foot washing. And then in Matthew the 26th chapter, verse 26 through 28, we have the symbols of the bread and wine, where he reveals that as symbols of his body and of his blood. And then back again in John 13, verse 34 and 35, I will read his new commandment he gives before he begins to talk to the disciples in chapter 14 through 16, and then his prayer in chapter 17. John 13:34, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. When we think about acronyms, if we're using this as how we know one another, we will have some MAS, mutually assured serenity, some peace. But if we worry about other things, if churches worry about other things, say authority and power, if that's their focus, or assets, if it's money or buildings, things to squabble over, or even favor. Some prefer to think they are favored more by God than others. You can tell sometimes when someone says, I love you, but I don't think you're one of the 144,000. But if we can throw all that aside and love one another, that will be the identifying factor of the children of God. And we read where there will be a remnant. What will a remnant have? What will it look like? Will it have all these other things, or will it noticeably be that we love one another? And I think about that book, Man's Search for Meaning, by Viktor Frankl, and I didn't have time to get it out and reread it, and I should have, but I remember him wanting to save his life's work and take it with him. Some of his friends wanted to bring their gold watch and bring it with them. But when they got to the concentration camp, they were stripped of everything, their clothes, and every hair on their body was shaved from them. And I remember him saying, laying there at night, nothing on, not even a blanket. It was just him and God. There was nothing else interfering in his relationship. So I would say our focus can and should be more on love one another, as Jesus told us. And then we have his words and prayers, chapter 14 through 17. And then we go back to Luke, the 22nd chapter. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I'll just reference these also, where he prays, God, if it's possible, take this cup from me. This week is not a very peaceful time for Jesus. Yet he has peace when he says, not my will, but yours be done. And an angel comes to strengthen him. And this was certainly not a peaceful time for Jesus, who is both man and God. And I would like to turn back to Matthew, the 11th chapter, because I think of Jesus this week, that his last week on earth. And in Matthew 11, and the words here are rest, but rest to me equals peace often. Matthew 11, the last three verses, 28 through 30. Some of my favorite scriptures, and we read them often. He says, "Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you will find rest unto your souls. You will find peace. My yoke is easy, and my burden is light." But what I wanted to notice was what Jesus could have done that week. Because verse 27, if we notice, says, "All things are delivered unto me of my Father, and no man knows the Son but the Father, neither knows any man the Father save the Son, and he to whomsoever the Son will reveal him." And back up in verse 25, I'll skip that for now, but all things are delivered unto him. All power in heaven and earth, Jesus had that week. And as a man, yes, he was man, he was God, he had to be strong. He had strength to resist the devil and to carry through with the plan. Then after that, Judas betrays Jesus and he is arrested. And then we know he is put on trial with Pontius Pilate and has to go to another trial because Pilate did not want to be responsible. But then finally Pilate delivers Jesus to be crucified. And then the crucifixion and his death, the 3 days and the 3 nights, and then the resurrection. And then in Luke the 23rd chapter, Jesus appears in a room to the disciples. Luke 23, verse 36. "And as they spoke, Jesus stood in the midst of them, and he said unto them, Peace be unto you." Peace comes from strength, and our peace comes from the strength of God, the strength of his plan, and the fulfillment that Jesus Christ did in his part of that plan. So we have much more comfort than mutually assured destruction for peace or mutually assured survival. We have spiritually assured survival. I'd like to close with the 29th Psalm. And when we pray, before we speak, we ask God that him and his Spirit would inspire us. But I have to give credit for the subject today and let you know it was inspired by our beloved Mr. Botha, who, as you know, has been encouraging us to read the Psalms because they cover every aspect of life. And he's encouraging us to do something that we already know is good, so it helps to be reminded and to do it. And most of us have our favorite Psalms or our go-to Psalms, and I decided to read some of them I haven't read in a while, and I came across Psalm 29. And I'll go ahead and read it, starting in verse 1. "Give unto the Lord, you mighty, give unto the Lord glory and strength. Give unto the Lord the glory due unto his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of his holiness. The voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord is upon many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty." Strength. "The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. Yes, the Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes them also to skip like a calf, Lebanon and Syrian like a young unicorn. The voice of the Lord divides the flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the hinds to calve and discovers the forest, and in his temple does everyone speak of his glory. The Lord sits upon the flood. Yes, the Lord sits king forever. Jesus Christ is our King forever. Verse 11, the Lord will give strength unto his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace. Brethren, peace be unto you.